Okay, here we are, week one, attachment B. I can see very quickly what this is turning into. I woke up at 3:30 this morning with thoughts just downloading, and that's not that's not a normal thing for me. That's not a normal occurrence. Uh, Usually, I sleep right through to where it's time to get up about 6:30 in the morning. So to wake up at 3:30 again is not normal for me. But if I'm really excited about something, or just there's some thought processes going to it, and there's something that is, like I said, just exciting in my life, then that does happen. But um, usually, even when I'm excited, it doesn't wake me up at 3:30 in the morning. It's a very rare occurrence. So here I am this morning. I'm going to record some things, and what I'm based on what I've shared so far. So the call, and then attachment A, and this being B. What I'm starting to see now, I felt something was going to evolve with this course that would really be a game changer. And I'm starting to see how that's evolving now. This is almost more like a podcast, like where somebody does a podcast on a daily basis. I don't think that I'll be doing an attachment daily, but right now I'm going to capitalize on the information that's downloading that I feel is relevant and important. I actually believe that these attachments will be some of the most important information, the meat and potatoes of what could be um, brought to light here, what could be articulated, what can help move us forward. And so I would recommend treating these attachments as some of the most important things to tap into and to glean from, because it really is that light and knowledge that's downloading to help accomplish the end goal, and that is to overcome the things that keep us paralyzed and keep us from moving our lives forward, our Isagenix business, and just ultimately our lives. And so just figure out a way to listen to these and to glean from them on a regular basis. Don't get behind. So if that's figuring out how to listen to them while you're driving, or while you're doing things where those pockets of free time that you have, I would use those to listen to these. I don't know how many there'll be every week. I'm just going to do it as they come to me. And I like doing it this way. I think people who are authors like doing it in a book, but I think this is very immediate. This is very real time type experience, and very in the moment. So capitalizing on that in whatever ways you can throughout your busy week, right? And make sure that you're not just listening, but that you're internalizing it, and then that the correct adjustments are made in your behaviors, your beliefs, and again, well, most importantly, in your behaviors, in your actions. So incorporate them and apply them, make them applicable as you're listening and you're discovering these things. So I want to share some things based on the last on attachment A, and it's not redundant. It's going to be along the same lines, but it's just helping to clarify that and get the deep-seated understanding to where it makes so much sense, right? Just like the law of gravity makes so much sense. It's so deeply rooted into you that it governs your actions. So what we need is clarity, right? And the opposite of that clarity would be ignorance. So the more clarity we can speak around these very important things, and we haven't even gotten into the book yet. What I'm seeing, what's happening right here in this first little bit, is preparing what your mind is about to go through. If you're reading the book, your mind's already going through it. And there are some things that are imperceivable until they're pointed out. And so we will be getting into the book. I believe we'll read that in the next Zoom that we do on Monday and start reading it. But I could see how this is preparing the foundation for the process that's already taking people out, even as we begin reading the first chapter. So let's let's get ahead of that. And that's really what I feel like is being inspired here. So let me share I'm going to go through and share what I've written down and talk through this. So there's a few things that I want to read here, and then I want to show a little diagram that I drew up that I think will help those that are visual like myself. So here we are, week 1, attachment B. In the very act, process, and engagement of learning, the opportunity to engage in a new empowering belief, which would lead to new ideas, concepts, and behaviors, is thwarted in the very act, in the very process. Like for those of you that are familiar with the Healthy Mind and Body program, you're in the very act and very process of wanting to progress and learn things and change the way we do things. But in the very act and engagement of doing it, we're thwarting ourselves because of something that we're not recognizing, something that we're not seeing, which we talked about, in attachment A. But I want to continue to talk about this and bring a little bit more to light here. So if the false and limiting belief we now recognize, and a child can't do this, because a child is incapable, a little child, right? Jesus says you have to become as little children, as a little child. Well, a little child, if the false and limiting belief we now recognize isn't changed in this very precise and exact moment that we're being presented the new truth, then we're thwarting ourselves. We're missing the opportunity in the very act of taking the opportunity to change. And a child can't do that because a child hasn't learned 2 opposing philosophies yet. A child is like a clean slate, right? No paradigm, no false beliefs made real, right? A child is incapable of doing that. So Jesus was exactly right. How profound, right? A child cannot limit themselves in taking on the new belief because they don't have an old belief on it yet. And this is what we must become. But as adults, we have to go about it completely differently, right? There's going to be some conscious things that we have to know. There needs to be some intelligence so that we can consciously recognize that and address it. So, all right, so if the false and limiting belief we now recognize isn't changed in this very precise moment, the exact moment which we're presented this new truth. So for a lot of people, we're being presented a new truth about being rich, right? And there's I don't want to say a lot, but there are some other very profound, very important, essential truths that we're going to be learning as we go through this book. Just the principle of becoming rich isn't the only truth that we're going to be exposed to in this, and why it's our right to, and why we must, right? So if it isn't in this very precise and exact moment, we cling to the old and we reject the new, right? And we saw an example of that. Somebody was already bringing up a comment where they were already clinging to the old, right? We talked about that in attachment A. So if in this very precise and exact moment, which can only be done by fostering, nurturing, and cultivating the new belief, not clinging to the old one and rejecting the new. That's what the mind was already starting to do. And I know it's not just for the person who brought it up, Heather bringing it up, and then a person making the comment where we could point it out and contrast that, but every single person, like, in one sense or another, is doing this, right? We're just able to, through this example, contrast it so we can recognize it, which can only be done by fostering, nurturing, and cultivating the new belief. In order to foster and frame up new ideas about oneself. So in order for us to make that progress that we're looking for, we have to take that new idea, that new concept that is in opposition to our old belief, right, which a child doesn't have, but as an adult, it's in opposition to our new belief. We have to, in this very precise moment, start to foster, nurture, and cultivate the new belief in order, here's the important part, in order to foster and frame up the new ideas about ourselves, the new image, the new concept. Remember, we have to start to frame up these new ideas and these new concepts about ourselves in order to get to the new behavior, which then produces the new results. And if we don't do this in this precise moment, we will hang on to the old concepts of ourselves, which will just regurgitate the old recycled behaviors that we have, right? So very important that you understand this part right here. So unless we do this, I put our goose is cooked. You ever hear that term? Like, it's done. Stick a fork in it. It's done. It's cooked. There's nothing you can do. It's already been cooked. All right. Any change that you want to do to the goose in preparation before cooking, the time has already come and gone. It's cooked. Right. So unless we foster and develop matching new behaviors from this new idea about this new belief that is in opposition to our old belief, unless we start to frame it up and build supporting evidence and nurture, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move on, but unless we start to build supporting evidence around the new concept, our goose is cooked. And your brain already wants to go back to the old recycled behaviors because that's your governing, guiding mechanism that in every moment, like an airplane, we're trying to take you off course, like an airplane blown by a gust of wind. All of a sudden, the guiding mechanism wants to bring you back immediately. So in the engagement of what we're doing right now, your old mechanism, your old guiding mechanism, like the airplane, is trying to bring you back in the very act of us being engaged and trying to change that guiding mechanism, right? So consciously, we have to be aware of that and kind of see, in a sense, what we're up against and what it's going to take. So if we focus on the old, if we let that guiding, governing mechanism get us to think about the old concept and forget the new one that was just presented to us, you see how the mind did that? It took the new idea, the new concept, the new truth, and it said, no, let's focus on the old one. And so this is self-deception. This is the beginning of that self-deception because it got us to focus on the old. We're being deceived, right? So our actions don't change, which then we have to go into justification, which we'll realize and laugh at the self-justification we gave ourselves. It's like the spouse, the husband, it wasn't Bob or whatever, it was Bud. It's Bud, right? Because I was listening to it last night. Bud, when he didn't take the action to do what he knew he should do, he clung to the old, right? And he deceived himself. And through deception, we have to justify that deception for not taking the right action, right? So unless we do this, our goose is cooked. We focus on the old, self-deception sets in, we deceived ourselves. We deceived that light of truth that in that split second said, get up and help. And we start to justify that. And we come up with continuing to deceive ourselves. The justification goes into things that aren't true, right? It builds up a false narrative. I work harder than my wife. I'm more deserving. She should be honoring me and respecting and being appreciative and grateful for what I do, right? And so we go into this false narrative, which keeps us stuck in this old self-deception, self-justification, no new behavior, no new concept. There's no new concept of Bud about himself and his wife. There's no new concept. And this is what the new belief would allow us to do, is start to foster, frame, build up the case for the new belief, which would then have to bring in new ideas and new concepts about ourselves and about his spouse, his wife, right? Now the opportunity to comes to, because of that new idea, that new concept, that new image that he's making space for within himself, he now makes the new behavioral change, and voila, right? The results that he wanted, a better relationship, a more loving, a more close, maturing relationship. So there's so no new behavior or action is possible in this case. And the guiding, governing mechanism, like the airplane, the guidance mechanism in the airplane that's constantly doing that, your subconscious is constantly doing that. And it's doing it in the very act of you being involved in the program that's actually designed to help you stop doing that. So this is an incredible new light. Like, I'm learning something deeper here through this process about that guiding, governing mechanism. I've always talked about, I've talked about paradigms in the past and how powerful they are in keeping us where we are. But this is some new light, some new perspective, some new knowledge that's being downloaded here. So that's why I woke up at 3:30 in the morning. It was still downloading. So many examples of where Jesus was teaching and the listeners justified in the very act of listening to, and in the opportunity in that precise moment where the truth is coming from the very individual and who no lie or falsehood could be conceived of, right? Jesus. In the very act of listening to the truth, they justified. They justified themselves. They cling to the old rather than cling to the new idea, which was absolutely the truth coming from Jesus. He is the way, the truth, and the light, right? And so there is no ability for him to even teach and facilitate a falsehood. So in the very act of listening to the light of truth, the old mechanism justified. And Jesus understands this part of human nature. That's why he never judged anybody. The one who had the right to judge everybody was more merciful and understanding, because nobody does this to themselves on purpose. This is part of that human experience. And I need to look up the word dichotomy, because I think like it's this, the human, is it the paradox, where it's such a difficult thing to even identify. And unless it's pointed out to us by somebody who has identified it, you're going to remain stuck because you're totally unaware of it. Self-deception is where you don't know that you're the problem, or that there's a problem that exists within you. And so you could never address it, right? So I guess I think the human paradox is probably fitting. So we cling to the new idea. So we cling to the old rather than clinging to the new idea that was just presented, the truth that was being presented, which if adopted would totally have changed the outcome in their lives, right? We can see, I mean, if you read the Bible and you know the story, you can see how the end scenario would have totally been changed in people's lives and how they behave, right? So some things that came to my mind was light and truth. Paradigms are filled with false things made true, and those false beliefs justify the individual or give the individual the opportunity to change. So there's two things going on here. That paradigm and that false narrative that we cling to, we'll justify ourselves in that when we hear the new truth as an individual, or it gives the individual the opportunity to change, to cling to that new truth. But you've got to understand the processes by that. And there are situations and scenarios where people have clinged to that because they get this intimation and they can play out, they can future speak into that new truth, and they can see how it would play out in their lives, and they start to adopt it. But in most cases, these very subtle, very unperceivable things that keep us stuck, we don't know how to address those. But there are cases and scenarios and situations where people have gotten that light and that understanding through the Spirit, and they can foresee how adopting that new belief, and so they adopt it and they build the case for it, and they start to take that on as the new belief, right? And we've seen and we've experienced that ourselves in certain situations. So if you choose the latter, be prepared to pick up your cross and bear it, because in picking up the cross, to take on that self-guiding mechanism like the airplane, to take that on is going to take some tremendous amount of effort and discipline from you. There's going to be chemical reactions that are created in your brain by your subconscious and your neural net that are going to make you feel a certain way, going to make you feel uncomfortable through a chemical reaction. You've got to be prepared and ready to take that on. And it's not for the faint of heart, right? You've got to really, really want this. So continuing on, when you recognize this, you begin to see very clearly that you're being ran by and remaining stuck by your old paradigm, the limiting false beliefs. So we can see how we go into self-deception, justification, no new action or behavior is taken, even though that's what we're after, right? And this is happening beneath the surface on a subconscious level. Even in the very act and process of trying to learn and grow and progress into a new result, which comes through a new behavior, right? So in spite of all of that, in spite of all of your efforts and you showing up and you listening to these attachments and you getting on the Zoom, in spite of all of that, until you can recognize and see very clearly what's going on here, you won't be able to address it effectively, right? The old paradigm will keep you stuck. It'll pull you back at a certain point when the going gets tough. So you have to take the new knowledge you were just presented. So I put in idea you are wanting. So let's see what I write here. Let me look down. So you have to take the new knowledge you were just presented. So the idea, you're wanting to reevaluate, right? That's why you're here. You're wanting to reevaluate. You don't want to stay stuck. And if you're going to cling to the old, then why are you here? Why are you showing up on the Zooms? Why are you listening to the attachments? You have to have wanted to reevaluate your old false narratives and your old false beliefs that were falsehoods made true. So the very act of reevaluating is why you're here. And if you negate that, then you got to ask yourself, why am I here if I'm not ready to reevaluate my right to be rich and that it's essential that I become rich? And there are other principles that we're going to talk about besides just money, right? The law of compensation and making impact in other people's lives. And how does money tie into that? They all tie in together. But right now, I guess we're kind of speaking to one thing that I'm using as an example is your right to be rich. But there's going to be other things and principles that collaborate with that and intertwine to make the overall picture of what you're wanting to accomplish with your life full and fulfilled. But you came here to reevaluate your false limiting beliefs, right? Right? That's why you're here. So don't negate the very purpose of why you're here by clinging on to the old. All right? So you have to take the new knowledge you were just presented and take it on as a new belief, regardless of what you, your old paradigm, or anyone else may think. And at once, begin to adopt it, foster it, guard it, cultivate it, add to it, build it up, strengthen it, right? Without questioning it. Look for all the supporting evidences around it. You're going to get that in the book. He's giving you things to cling to build it up, to foster it, to add supporting evidence as to why you should be rich here. Are you already negating that? Have you read it without even internalizing it? Did you read it like a robot and not put any emotion and reasoning and perspective into what he's arguing the case here? Because he's giving you the opportunity to foster and grow and support your right to be rich, right in the very chapter that your brain is challenging and questioning already, right? Go back and read the chapter 1, your right to be rich. He gives you, so let me go on. The moment you question it, you are now leaning toward the old. You got to have total blind faith here. You got to be like a child, right? A child doesn't need blind faith because a child doesn't have anything to negate it, nothing to try to rebuke or rebuttal it, right? So, but as an adult, we don't come in at that level. So you got to decide, am I going to come into this and play at 100%? That's how it's presented in seminars, right? Are you going to play at 100%? Are you going to do what's asked of you, right? And put everything you've got into it? Well, in this sense, I guess I'm asking you to come into this with total blind faith and start to take in and adopt and support as a new belief what he's teaching in chapter 1. But there's a sense there, and as you do this, there is a sense of something that you're feeling that's right about it, right? Because truth is truth, and your spirit resonates with truth, regardless of intellectually what you've erroneously adopted as a paradigm. The truth gets past all of that. And there's some sense of, you know what, there is some truth to this. There is something right about this. And so we move forward with it because we know that we're not in dangerous territory here, right? Because to have the unrestricted free use of time, money, and resources would really free me up to do a lot more good in the world. There's just some truth that resonates with you about that. But if you cling to the old, then your goose is cooked, right? If you keep going back to it, yeah, but. Instead of reverse engineering, you future engineer it. Like you could reverse engineer things and you can go both ways of it. You could see the end from the beginning and the beginning from the end, right? And so there's this sense of, as you're learning these things, I think people who have this ability to future engineer it. If I play this out and I actually do become very successful in my Isagenix business, this is what my life would look like. This is what other people's lives would look like. And so there's this sense of resonating with in the very moment of being presented this new truth, right? So there's all these different dynamics and options and different levels on that spectrum that people are going to be faced with as the individual. Nobody's going to experience these things exactly the same. So just as a child would if it was receiving the instructions for the first time. So take it without questioning it, just as a child would if it was receiving the instruction for the first time. You must become as a little child in this sense. The child has no ability to counter the truth with false narratives and beliefs, and that talk that goes on internally upon hearing the truth. They haven't developed one yet. They have not developed a counter to it. So they take it as truth. And unfortunately, as children, we're taught false things like money doesn't grow on tree, and only, anybody that's rich is dishonest, right? And so the child doesn't have anything to do but accept that as a child and take that on as a belief. And we see that with race. We see that with gender. You could see how the world is messed up because of these false narratives made real on a clean state or a clean slate or state, right? And it becomes part of the person's paradigm, right? So this is how I went into read. So the child has no ability to counter the truth with a false narrative and belief upon hearing the truth. This is how I went into reading The Science of Getting Rich. Now, there's so many things that went into preparing me to do that I'm not going to go into right here. But when I went into reading The Science of Getting Rich, I basically went into it as a child with an absolute clean slate. And just some of the things that went into that, just to kind of help me maybe understand that, was I had put so much effort and time and energy into doing it the way that I thought I should be doing it, but it didn't work. And when I say I put so much time, energy, and effort into it, you'll never understand what I mean by that, but I'm saying I put a lot of time, energy, and effort into it, and I was as far away from my goals and dreams as I could possibly be. So I allowed the new teacher to come in, and I didn't say, well, no, it's not that way. That never came up for me once. I said, I'm going with this 100%. Let's see what happens, right? And I knew and I never felt like I was stepping into danger zone where it was going to lead me down a path of destruction. I never felt that from reading the book, right? I believe that you could be put into a scenario where somebody says they're teaching the truth, but really it's a pathway that's going to lead you to destruction. False teachers, right? Wolves in sheep's clothing, right? So, and again, that's because of me having that relationship and that cord tied to God, and wanting to be led by truth and light, and knowing that God was the ultimate source, and there were certain aspects and values and concepts that I knew about God, and the values and the guiding governing, values that were tied to that. Never gonna sever that, right? So I can feel when I'm going off of safe ground and when something's leading to destruction because of that tie that I have with God and my understanding that I've developed thus far at that point. So I became, as a child who learns for the first time and doesn't have to consciously negate any old false limiting beliefs, either consciously or subconsciously. Subconscious will pop up into the conscious, right? And even though it's very subtle, we can become aware of them. So I didn't consciously negate any old false limiting beliefs. I didn't let them negate the new things that I was learning in the book because it hasn't developed in any yet, right? So I became, as a child who learns for the first time and doesn't have to consciously negate any old false limiting beliefs because it hasn't developed any yet. Again, that's how I came into reading the book, and that takes some mental discipline to do that. So now, or maybe just some kind of knowledge, like intelligence, some kind of understanding of that process. Now, and I could speak to that more aggressively now than I could when I was reading the book. I wasn't so awesome at doing that as I was reading the book. There were still some challenges and things, but I could speak to it much more boldly, much more clearly now in hindsight, which is going to facilitate your learning, right? And be of benefit to you, because I can speak to it that way now, as though it was so then. But I'm not going to go back and try to figure out, well, what were the challenges and what were the things that I actually tried to negate in that moment? The end story is that I didn't ultimately end up doing that. So now you're prepared to inherit the kingdom of heaven, which is in you, right? So throughout this course, you will learn other important and valuable principles and insights that are essential to this overall process. This isn't the only one. Like, this isn't the end of the course. We're just getting started, right? And we'll be adding more to it. So the challenge here that I propose to you is the call to action: adopt the new idea as though you had no other belief at all regarding it, especially and primarily the contradicting ones. This is what you must do as an adult. We are not children. We can't unlearn what we've learned. So do you see now that if you don't do this, you will cling to it? You'll cling to the old, and it will disregard the actions of the new belief and the results it would have brought forth, right? You see clearly, let's go back to that. Do you see now how if you don't disregard your old limiting beliefs, you will cling to them? And you'll disregard the actions of the new belief and the results it would have brought forth because you didn't adopt a new belief. You hung on to the old belief. You agreed with the new belief, but there's a difference between agreeing with a new belief and adopting it as your own personal guiding, governing mechanism. Wow, that was worth the price of admission right there. There's a difference between agreeing with the new belief and adopting it. It's going to take some work. You got to pick up your cross and be ready to bear it. How do you do this? That's going to be revealed as we continue through the course, how we adopt it as a new belief. But in the meantime, start collecting the evidences. Go back and read that first chapter with a whole new different perspective, a whole new different vitality and enthusiasm and excitement around starting to take on the things that he's arguing for the case of your right to being rich. I'll suggest some other books as we go through the course and share some things, but go back. This book right here, he's arguing the case. Go back and read it with a whole new perspective. But in the meantime, start collecting the evidences through this book and others that I'll recommend, and building the case for why it is the truth, and start assuming it as part of who you are by writing it out in harmonious affirmations. And in the light of your new understanding, take it on with a whole new excitement and exuberance, a demanding attitude as you begin to reprogram your subconscious. So we will, assuming it as part of who you are. I'm so happy and grateful now that I have the unrestricted free use of time, money, and resources. I can do what I want, when I want, for as long as I want, because Isagenix is depositing $500 every week right into my bank account, or $5,000 every week, whatever that is for you, right? And start assuming that, writing that out, because that's a harmonious affirmation with your right to be rich. And then what's going to happen as you start adopting that, not just agreeing with it, but to start adopting it, your actions will change. Your actions that you're performing right now are the actions you're performing because of this old belief that you have in your brain. This is the deeply seated belief that is going to negate the new behaviors that you would need to have the results that you're wanting and making agreements with in your, being exposed to Isagenix. This deeply seated belief, you're coming up with justifications as to why you're not doing the behavior because you deceived yourself. I looked up deception because we're the false limiting beliefs, right? So I'm FLB. There's our new acronym, FLB. False limiting belief, built up over time. Could be over how long have you been alive? Building up that false narrative and all of the different things that have supported the supporting evidence that you believed around this false narrative that is deeply seated, and what's causing you to self-deception. So the new idea is presented. Here's the new idea. You've been exposed to it. So the old idea is rich, bad. Rich people, that's bad. That's the old idea right here. And it's causing you to reject any behavior that would lead to you becoming rich. Ooh, that's powerful. It's rejecting any behavior. You might start the behavior, but it's going to sabotage you. We see that in diets, and we see that with the compensation plan in Isagenix, right? We see it with product use, and we see it with compensation plan use. It's going to sabotage the behaviors. And it will, so the new idea is presented, rich is good. Rich is your right. God wants you to be rich. You reject that, you immediately go into justification. So I looked up self-deception because we know that when we reject it, we just deceived ourselves. So I looked up the word deceive, a state of being deceived. Deception is a state of being deceived. We deceived ourselves, our own brain, in the very act of trying to get the results that we want, which would need the new belief. In the very act of doing that, we deceived ourselves. Our brain deceived us. And that's called the RAS system, the reticulating activating system, which is going to keep you here like the airplane is kept on its course through a mechanical device. It will keep you stuck, no matter how much you agree with the new idea. The new idea has to become a deeply seated belief. And you can't have both. You're going to either have one or the other. You're going to serve one or the other, right? So when we reject the idea, and we have to go into justification. So there's no new concept of self. There's no new beliefs, no new image of ourselves that are framed up because we went into self-deception and justification, which kept the old belief alive. So how could there be a new idea that's deeply seated? It's just surface. You might be holding it on the surface, but what's running the show is this. So there's no new actions, no new results. Business as usual. Yep, the old guidance mechanism kept you on course. A child doesn't have this. See right here? A child doesn't have this. That's why you must become as a child. But we're not children. We do have this. We have to pick up our cross. We have to bear the work that it's going to take to overcome that. And again, I gave you a little bit on what you could be doing right now, framing up some harmonious affirmations to start driving. So what you want to do is you want to start building the case around this new belief. So you want to start getting supporting evidences that feed into this new idea, right? And so we're going to learn that over this course, over time, and how we build that supporting evidence and what we do to get it to become a deeply seated belief. And then what starts to happen is we starve this one off, and the synapse just doesn't fire. It doesn't fire as strong. That spark becomes less and less as this spark becomes greater and greater. That's the process. They call it neuroplasticity. That means you can take on a whole new image and concept and belief and change it. Some people do it with talents, like they don't have an old belief around becoming an artist, so they take art class, and they've never were told that you couldn't be an artist because it never came up, right? So they just get this wild idea that, hey, I want to become an artist. So they start taking class, and they start building supportive beliefs around becoming the artist. So they go to class, they learn about colors, they learn about mixing colors, they learn from other artists and their ideologies, and they learn from the teacher, supporting evidences on them becoming an artist, which was the original idea. Now that starts to frame up, and now they become a great artist who does great artwork. But they didn't have to deal with this because there was never a concept of them being a bad artist. So we see this kind of neuroplasticity happen a lot with talents and things that people incorporate later on in life. And a lot of people have become great artists after they were 50 years old, but they didn't have this to fight against. And fighting against this, again, this will create chemicals in the brain that will produce emotions. Those are very difficult and challenging to overcome consistently and repetitively. But once you know, then you know, right? And now you know what you have to take on. It's better to know the enemy than to not see the enemy. If you can't see the enemy and where it's thwarting you, then it's pretty hard to take it on and overcome it. So again, going through this and learning the things that I've learned can help facilitate your learning and speed up the process if you're willing to enter in on blind faith and do the actions that are being asked of you to do. I said that in the introduction, right? You're going to be asked to do very specific things. Now the choice is yours. Are you going to do them or not? So I'm going to ask you very specifically to take these new truths as on 100% blind faith and take them as absolute immutable truths and start to build supporting evidences around them. Again, you can build that supporting evidence right in the chapter 1. Agree with what he's saying there. Understand, ponder on why what he's saying is true. And don't go to here. It's going to try to pull you there, but don't go there. And then get 3x5 cards. I have lots of 3x5 cards. I just always have a stack of them. There's so many 3x5 cards with new supporting evidences and triggers for me to harmoniously build evidence of that new supporting image around that new belief. And applying that new belief around a new image of myself. So if I do take on the new idea, okay, I take it on as a new belief, I'm going to start creating an image of myself, image of self. Those are going to go on a 3x5 card. They're going to go on a 3x5 card in black and white, written out. And I'm going to build that image around myself based on the new idea of becoming rich is my right. In fact, it's essential that I do it in order to serve God more effectively. I'm going to start, so then taking that new idea of being rich, I'm going to frame that up around the image of myself as an Isagenix associate. So I've always, Isagenix, because it's the vehicle for me to serve God better, has always been at the forefront of my affirmations. It's been a part of my self-image. And I grow that image on my 3x5 cards, right? And so that's how I start to create this over here with the supporting evidences. And I'll typically put those down on a 3x5 card. That's been my most effective way, process and protocol to trigger the things that I need to trigger within my brain, the supporting evidences of the new image of myself based on the new idea. So there's the new idea. Here's the image that I'm building of myself around that new idea. And I 3x5 that. So as we go through the course, we'll be talking more about that and giving you exact specific things on how to do it with your Isagenix business. Pretty cool. All right. See you on the next one.